All right. I'd like to welcome everybody this evening to the Committee of the Whole, starting a few minutes late tonight. We just broke out of another meeting, and but I think it's actually maybe not going to take the full hour tonight from what I've heard. Anyways, we've got just one item on the agenda tonight. It's a discussion of alleys, alley policy. And with that, Chip, I'm just going to turn this over to you.
Great. Thank you, Council President Corman, council members. Chip Vincent, joined by Angie Mathias here tonight to talk about alleys, which has been a point of discussion for quite some time, but I will share with you that
Try clicking.
that this didn't just all start this year. The alley issue first came up in 2004 when the city, as part of its Growth Management Act requirements, updated the city's comprehensive plan. And as part of that mandatory update of the comprehensive plan, they really looked at the street requirements and the minimum standards to implement quality development for the city. And one of the components of the policies in the plan was really to emphasize the grid pattern with the grid and the alleys associated with many of the traditional neighborhoods that we had in the city of Renton. And then this last bullet here is actually a specific piece of language that's taken directly from the code that was adopted as part of that comprehensive plan update in 2004. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in more detail, but I just want to begin to frame the discussion by what was adopted in the code in the early 2000s. And it says, alley access is the preferred street pattern. Prior to approval of a plat without alley access, the reviewing official shall evaluate an alley layout and determine that the use of alleys is not feasible. So that's code language that was put in the code, that there shall be an evaluation of an alley layout, and there's a very high standard that shall be not feasible if we're not going to put alleys in new residential subdivisions and developments. However, since 2004, it's been seen as challenging and somewhat impractical to enforce. And in 2008, the council directed the staff to work with the Planning and Development Committee and the Planning Commission to update the regulations regarding alleys to allow for greater clarity and greater flexibility. So in 2008, what the Planning Commission and the council agreed to was a scheme where for the residential low density, that's the RC and the R1 zone classifications, wouldn't require alleys, wouldn't even look at considering them because the lots were so big in those zones. However, for the R8, R10, and R14, they were going to keep that language that said that we would do an evaluation of a layout and see if it was not feasible. On the R4 was the interesting one where the Planning Commission and the council gave the department 5 criteria to evaluate whether or not alleys should be required or not, and that was done on a case-by-case evaluation. So that's a little bit on the background, and now Angie's going to talk about some of the details of alleys in terms of the benefits and what results and what those policies were about. Then I'll come back at the end and talk about next steps.
So some of the benefits and some of the reasons that we like alleys are that it improves public safety, it's better designed for quality, sustainable neighborhoods, and essentially, at least in the city of Renton, it's a neutral cost for development and land usage. It doesn't use more land to do alleys. So the reason that it's an improved benefit for public safety is that it reduces the conflict between pedestrians and cars. So when we have that sidewalk, that's territory or land that's for the pedestrians, whereas the street is for the cars. And so when you have the vehicles crossing over that to go park in their garages, that's a point of conflict across that sidewalk. And so when you have an alley, that reduces that opportunity where the pedestrians have that dedicated strip of land that's for them. Now that there's not that conflict where a car crosses over that. Oftentimes the significance of this is increased because cars actually have to back out of their garages, and so they can't quite see very well what's behind them, and sometimes that leads to things that aren't healthy for everybody, creates a negative consequence. Okay, we'll try this. there we go. So as far as the design for quality, sustainable neighborhoods, Renton for a long time has been working on making statements and ensuring that we have quality neighborhoods within the city of Renton. We've invested in those, and we continue to make investments in those quality neighborhoods. When you have a neighborhood, especially what we're really talking about with this is as that density increases. But when the face of the entire block is garages and driveways, that's not very conducive to our commitment of quality neighborhoods. That's sending a message that cars are really the priority, not pedestrians, not other folks. And this is really at that density when you've got like just a lot of houses that are lined up. When we're at like R1 and R4, the houses are more spread out, and that significance is not as important. And we've been consistently making amendments to our city code that follows that in line. We developed residential design standards that as the density goes up, you have to do more to the homes. You have to have more design features, more treatments to the facades and those sorts of things. And the more that we ask for, the more dedications. For instance, when you get to the R10 and the R14, you do more with open space and that sort of thing, more improvements to the quality of the home. Whereas with R1 and RC, we don't really ask for a whole lot about what we want from you to do with the home. And so we've made those changes over time, and we've been very consistent in doing that to ensure our quality neighborhoods. Another benefit is that we've made some changes to our city road standards, so it sort of results in a neutral development cost. We've reduced what we require for the rights-of-way for the streets for the cars, and we only ask that alleys be 12 feet wide. So that we've taken away what was required for the regular right-of-way, and if you do alleys, it only needs to be 12 feet, and so that's sort of a neutral trade-off for the roadway, for what's being paved and the costs of those roads. It also is a neutral cost for land usage. We use net density, and you've seen, I think, the slide before where I show the sort of the graphic of the difference between net density and gross density. With net density, we take away your right-of-way and the critical areas, and then you apply density. You apply what's left over. You can build on what's left of the land. And we don't require that alleys be considered in that right-of-way. And so then that leaves that as part of that area that's left over, so it would not affect the lot yield. So if normally they could do a 10-lot subdivision, then they could continue to do that. If they did alleys, it wouldn't affect that.
Okay, Mr. Person has a question.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Okay, so if you require an alley, you're going to let them narrow the street down.
We already have narrower streets,
We have narrowed the streets.
correct, regardless of whether or not they.
So even if there's an alley in the back, people will still be able to park cars in the front of their house on both sides of the street.
It would depend on what we would anticipate for the average daily trips. We could have a configuration where they would only have parking on one side of the street or on both sides, depending on what we are anticipating for the number of vehicular trips throughout that neighborhood.
And I guess then, what about parking in the alley?
Well, since the garages would be loaded off of the alley then, we would expect that they would park in the alley, or park in those garages and not in the alley.
Yeah, if I can add a couple things onto that. The amount of parking that would be required would be based on the road classification and the amount of, as Angie said, the average daily trips for that road. So it's not a one-size-fits-all in terms of the size of the road and the accommodation for parking first. And typically, whether a lot is front-loaded or takes access from the front or from the rear, there's always an expectation that the parking will be accommodated on the driveway apron, whether it's in the front of the house or coming off the alley. But typically, those being only 12 feet wide, you can't allow for parking in the alleys because you have to allow for the movement of traffic through there.
Okay, so I guess my concern is that people are going to have come and visit, they can't park in the alley. Most people's, I build a garage, but I would challenge anybody to drive around the city and see how many two-car garages that people can put their cars in because it becomes storage sheds.
Yeah.
So now they park in the alley, they park in the driveway, and now there's no parking for visitors, especially if we limit it on the street. And my other concern is your public safety is, where most accidents happen when backing out, it's because kids are playing in the driveway, or they're playing and somebody backs over them. I mean, it's horrible that does happen, but that does happen. So to me, you're not increasing the safety
Right.
because the kids are going to start now thinking the alley is their road to, because it's an alley, it's safe, so they can run up and down, and I think we create a little bit more of a hazard by doing that. And it's been my experience that more people have neighborhood squabbles over alleys than they do anything else, and it creates it's my alley. You can't drive in it. And I guess if we're going to require alleys, I think they should be a dedicated city alley, because classic example of that is I keep thinking of that housing development up off of Jones Park, it's a planned unit development, and they have a nice long private road going in, and people bought up there thinking that it was a city street, and then when it went to pieces,
Yeah, I know where you're
all of a sudden,
Falcon Ridge.
Falcon Ridge,
Yeah.
that those people all of a
Right,
sudden got this big assessment because they had to pay for what they thought was a city street.
Yeah.
So I guess those are my concerns, and as we go down this road, that I see those are issues to me.
Well, with respect to the safety, you're absolutely right. People backing up where kids are playing is always going to be a challenge or an issue, and that happens whether the kids are playing in the alley or in the driveway in the front of the house. I mean, there's tragic accidents that happen on both sides. When Angie was speaking to public safety, it's just that interface between the sidewalk and somebody backing and going through is really the connection point where we have potential safety issues that's being alleviated when you're having the access come off the alley. But you're absolutely right. When people are backing, doesn't matter if it's in front of the house or behind the house, if kids are playing, and that's really a function of density. When you get really dense, there's not a lot of areas for kids to play, and you have this challenge of public safety.
Well, I would argue from my 30-some years of experience that you're just trading, and I like alleys in the right place. I have a wonderful alley. I mean, but parking is an issue when somebody, decides that they can park by their garage and nobody else can get in or out, and then it does create another problem. So it's not.
Yeah. There is a proposal for new language, which I tend to favor the new language. It allows more flexibility. Although, Don, I also agree with some of your points. And one thing I guess I might want to come back to is, I notice we say any or all of the following factors may apply and should be considered in evaluating whether the use of alleys is not practical, and maybe we should include safety in that list. Although I
How
know,
it's interpreted, and
yeah, and
I don't think we should require
yeah,
them.
and I know we should
At all.
probably let him go on, but I do want to say I tend to agree, because one of the other issues is when we talk about kids playing, is the other alternative for kids to play is their backyard. But if their backyard is effectively the alley, I mean, unless people fence, they'd have to put a fence across the backyard, but then it's hard to get from the alley into the yard, unless it's an electric gate or something. So, but anyways, I think out of fairness, maybe we'll let Chip go on, but I appreciate the input.
So,
I'm sorry, Angie, yeah.
no, that's all right. It'll be Chip's turn really quickly, actually. You're just premonition. So the expressed concerns, just to be clear, what we've heard from folks that have been working with this as applicants, is that there's a lack of clarity, in particular with the usage of the word preferred, stating that alley access is the preferred street pattern. What does that mean? under what circumstances, those sorts of things, and that there's a lack of predictability, that the use of the phrase "shall be determined through an evaluation" and "not feasible," that they don't know what, do I need to do an alley, or am I not going to be doing an alley, and how is that going to play out for my potential development? And so that's what we've attempted to respond to here.
So, working through a lot of the issues and frankly some of the discussion that we're having here tonight, we are advancing to the Committee of the Whole recommendation for an administrative code interpretation. But before I get into the details of what an administrative code interpretation is, let me talk about it, the details. First off, administrative code interpretations are provided in city code, and it allows the administrator to make determinations where there's a conflict in the code, or there's a use that hasn't been anticipated that's being requested, or there's some issue where there's alignment necessary between a policy and a provision in the code that needs to be clarified so we can move forward and answer the question definitively for somebody asking the question. And so what we do when we do an administrative interpretation is that we do a one-page summary of what the issue is that came in front of the department, and then we post it on our website, and we invite the public to review and comment on it for a 2-week period, after which we receive the comments. We'll make a final administrative interpretation, and then there's a 2-week period within which, if people don't agree with that, it can be appealed to the city hearing examiner. It's actually happened a couple times where people didn't agree with the administrative interpretation. The point I want you all, the people who are on the Committee of the Whole who aren't on the Planning and Development Committee, is that there is a due process associated with administrative interpretation that allows people to comment and appeal if they don't feel like the decision was reached in a way that's satisfactory from their point of view. Then annually, these administrative interpretations are all bundled together at the end of the year and then taken before the Planning Commission for public review so we can explain ourselves. Why did we recommend what we did here? And then the Planning Commission recommendation is then forwarded to the Planning and Development Committee, and then it comes to the council as part of our annual docket work. So there is a process for clarifying issues where there's ambiguity in the code, conflicts in the code, or there's a use or a situation being proposed that frankly wasn't anticipated when the code was originally adopted. But it does provide something that once it's approved, it then becomes part of the code administratively and doesn't get reviewed until the council reviews it later that year. So it allows us to continue doing business and move permits forward. So there's 3 aspects of what's being recommended in the administrative interpretation. And first is, as I indicated at the very beginning, when we last did the work on alleys in 2008, the recommendation was to say for the RC and the R1 zones and the RLD land use designation, we're not going to consider alleys, but for R8, R10, and R14, we are going to consider them. And the council gave us some discretion on the R4, and they gave us 5 evaluation criteria. I can tell you, as the department head, planning and now CED, we have never required alleys once for any R4 development. So based on that evaluation of projects we've done and looking at those criteria, really they haven't been effective. Simply because for R4 lots, you're talking about a 7,000 square foot lot with 70 feet of street frontage up front. It's simply, it doesn't make sense to require alleys. And it would really be a significant burden for the developer to have that size of lot with that kind of street frontage for one lot, and then have to develop an alley as well. So there just hasn't been the circumstances in looking at this policy for 5 years where we felt it would be appropriate to apply alleys. So part of the administrative interpretation is to go ahead and let's cut the R4 loose. Let's consider it as part of the RLD. And so for RC, R1, and R4, we aren't going to consider alleys at all. So the first part is to recommend R4 not be considered for alleys, basically based on size. The second part of it is that there's currently really no language that provides the clarity and predictability that the development industry is asking for about when alleys are going to be applied. And so again, based on our learned experience, having worked with the code now for some years, we're recommending a few things here. The first is that be applied where our alleys already exist and only for portions of subdivisions with interior lots. Even though we have an alley requirement, we have never required any subdivision be 100% loaded by alleys. Perimeter lots are always going to be much more feasible to be able to front load those. So we carved out those two areas where we already have a grid pattern with alleys, and for interior lots will be where they will be considered. Also to allow some flexibility in the R8 zone. And part of the discussion we had with the industry in terms of establishing what they could have absolute clarity of when these criteria would come into place was establishing a threshold. So what we discussed was establishing a threshold of 6 dwelling units per acre. So if you're proposing a development at 6 dwelling units per acre or less, we're not even going to consider alleys as an option. You're going to be able to advance the development and front load it. But if you go over R6 up to R8 densities, that's where we will consider alleys. But the third point is we're going to put a much finer point on when we are going to evaluate the need for alleys in the R8 zone and higher. So we're going to provide predictability based on basically 3 things. And again, this is based on our learned experience, having worked with this issue for several years now. And number 1 is just the size of the subdivision coming in. We have never had a short plat come in that I can remember where we've required an evaluation of alleys. Simply, a short plat is 9 lots or less. It's so small that it's just not practical to require alleys. So let's go ahead, let's document that. Let's say if you're going to do a short plat, we're not going to look at alleys as an option. The second thing is topography. We have in Renton, we have probably more topographical features and challenges than any other city I'm aware of in Puget Sound. And for alleys, it doesn't make a lot of sense in some circumstances. So let's consider steep slopes as one of those issues. We'll take it off the table, that we're not going to consider alleys where you have a lot of slopes. So you're going to minimize the amount of cutting and filling that you might have to do on a slope, and frankly, some unintended consequences if you did require alleys on really steep slopes. And then finally, looking at environmental impacts. If we have significantly constrained areas, by developing them out with alleys might actually have a negative impact on the environment and the amount of trees and critical area buffers that could be retained. So if there's going to be a negative environmental impact by applying alleys, let's not advance that as a policy that we should be considered. So those are the 3 key elements of the administrative interpretation that we have advanced to the council. So where this goes from here is that you have a committee of the whole report in front of you. And so we would like some discussion from you and direction. And if you recommend us moving forward with the administrative interpretation, then the next step would be we would post that online, get comments for 2 weeks from the public, and then once that's done and the appeal process has sunsetted, then that would actually become code that we would follow in our approval of all subdivisions. Again, we've tried to put a finer point and provide the clarity and predictability we've been asked for based on learned experience since the last time this issue has been addressed in 2008. But there's going to be a second step to the process, because an administrative interpretation's really only going to take us so far, and we're recommending that we have a more comprehensive evaluation of this policy as part of the docket work to be done by the city in 2014. So this provides a step forward towards refining the policies and the process that provides the guidance, clarity, and predictability that the customers are looking for and we're looking for as staff. that there has to be, from our point of view, a more comprehensive discussion with the planning commission, the public, and the council moving this forward. So there'd be a second step next year. So with that, Angie and I would be glad to try and answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Prince?
Thank you, Chip. Thank you, Angie. I just want to say, as someone who was on the planning commission in 2008, when we dealt with this, our goal was not to cause any kind of ambiguity. And so I'm glad that we're clearing that up. And I really appreciate this updated administrative interpretation. So, good job.
Thanks. Other questions from other council members?
In R8, so basically you're saying the alleys would only be required in an R8 zone,
And R10 and
R10 or
R14.
14.
in anything above R8?
Yeah.
And in R8, what's the size of a lot in an R8 zone?
5,000 square feet. Typically, a standard R8 lot is 50 by 100.
As, you know, as a detail, I did notice in the markup that I have, I was a little bit concerned about the, I could tell what you were trying to do with this little section where you show R8 and you say maximum net density. And I don't know if others have this or if I'm just,
We do in a
Yeah, it was a Dropbox.
oh, okay. But I was concerned that it might not say exactly what we intend to say in the way it's proposed,
Julia emailed it to us.
because it says maximum net density, R8, 8 dwelling units per net acre, except that the maximum shall be 6 dwelling units per net acre when alleys are not part of the street configuration. And I was concerned that if somebody has an R8 short plat, and we're going to give them an exception to the alley requirement because it's a short plat, this language would then go, well, the alley's not part of the street configuration, and hence they're limited to R6. And I don't think that's not really what you just said. I don't think that's what you meant. So I thought that relative to those words, I would recommend that it say 8 dwelling units per net acre, except that the maximum shall be 6 dwelling units per net acre when the alleys are not considered during the street configuration planning process.
That's a great point.
And so if somebody had a short plat and it said, you know, no alleys, and so it was going to be an R8, because I think that's what, I don't think we meant.
You're exactly right. That's what we intended.
Yeah, okay, and I wrote that out in case we want to use that later, but, but still, that doesn't address the, you know, some of Don's and Marcy's comments, and, you know, frankly, I've been on the council. I remember, as we've discussed alleys in the past, I frankly personally have never probably given it enough priority. I know that it was recommended, and it was usually part of a big package of changes, and we approved it. I've heard a lot of concerns though recently about the alley requirement, so I come at this quite open-minded, looking for the right answer. But Marcy, you had some things.
Well, you know, we're just coming off the neighborhood picnic season, and a question I get at every picnic from someone is, so what issues does council have before them right now? And I couldn't think of much other than alleys, so I talked about the issue. And I want to tell you that I have yet to find anyone that said they would buy a new home on an alley. Everyone goes, I'd never buy a house on an alley. 100% of the people. Now, I know we have 2 council members that live on alleys, and so they may have a different opinion, but I'm just going with what I heard out there. And then I have the same concerns that Don does. So I picture that, the topography and how,
Well, and I think to some extent that this also sort of balances that, because it's only asking for it on the interior lots, so it would still leave all of those other lots open just to the front-loaded development, and then it would just, if it was large enough and it worked, that it would be on those interior lots. So it sort of is best of both worlds in some ways.
I guess the other thing is, if we're having such a backlash from the developers, they know their market. they'd be building, they'd want to have them on alleys if that's what was selling. Right?
If I could just weigh in on that, I think Councilwoman Palmer, there's absolutely a good point, and which is what, from the basis of about 4 or 5 months worth of discussion with the Master Builders Association to try to find out what were the specific issues. And there's no question that, as Chip said, some of our topography and some of the other physical limitations surrounding some of the available development now do create real problems and concerns for the development community. So the effort in this administrative interpretation is to try to allow this balance between some predictability, because we said, well, you know what, we'll just take a look at each development as it comes in. Well, that's can be really frustrating and expensive for developers. They come in, they spend a lot of money trying to put together a preliminary plat, and then we discuss it, and we say, well, maybe we do this, maybe we do that. So rather than have them spend money up front where things might get modified, the discussion was, how can we give them some guidelines that would let them know early on, before they begin to spend some money on the development process. And that's the intent of this particular interpretation, at least unless and until the council ultimately decides to change, if you decide to change the overall alley policy. And I guess if that's a discussion that you want to have, I think it probably ought to be in the context of the overall comp plan and zoning process, as opposed to just taking this issue. You'll, if the council chooses, be able to hear from members of the master builders who I think feel like this probably is a path forward for them, at least in the interim.
I think that's a good time to ask, and I'll start with Mr. Hoffman, David Hoffman, if you'd like to come up.
Good evening. For the record, my name is David Hoffman, Hoffman. I'm here representing the Master Builders Association and want to take this time to thank you all for this great discussion that you all have had prior to this meeting, the time that Mr. Covington and Mr. Vincent have spent with me and our members to go over this issue. This issue has really come to the forefront this year as the economy has started to pick up, and it's become a significant issue for some of our members in the building industry in general in Renton. Beginning in late July, I really took it upon myself, and our association took it upon ourselves to start a new conversation with the city and really kind of hit reset when it came to this discussion. Since then, I and our association believes that significant progress has been made with this code interpretation before you today. And so that leads us to this discussion, this meeting this evening. On behalf of our members, again, I'd like to thank you all for this time and for the time that you have taken. We believe that this will provide the needed flexibility and clarity for the industry. And although some questions remain as to the implementation, and we'll see the appeal process come and go, we look forward to this being implemented, and we really look forward to working with the city over the next 8 to 12 months as we work on code changes, and seeing council members' ideas and hopefully our ideas at the table and members of the community. So I will add that I'm here as a representative of the Master Builders and as a citizen of the city of Renton. My family and I live here in the city, own a condo up on Benson Hill. So
Excellent.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you. And Barbara or Nancy, yes, welcome. And please, as Mr. Hoffman did, if you could state your full name for the record.
Oh, you bet. My name is Nancy Rogers. I'm a land use attorney with Karen Cross and Hempelman, and I was last before you all on June 17th, when I asked you all to kick off this process, and very, very glad that I did. Pleased generally with the results. I do have a letter that I'm going to talk from a little bit. I'm going to have some introductory remarks first. So while he's passing that out, I will just give those remarks. Again, Nancy Rogers. I don't live in the city of Renton, but as I told you last time, I did go to Renton High School. So I used to live. we are, again, as I said, pleased with the discussion that's led to the administrative interpretation that's before you today. However, we also agree with Councilmember Palmer's comment earlier in this meeting that frankly, no one really wants alleys out in suburbia. And, you know, if you were willing to go there, we'd love to see an administrative interpretation and ultimately a code amendment that simply said alleys don't belong out in our suburban neighborhoods along the lines of Tiffany Park and other areas like that, because frankly, no one wants them. From that, I wanted to make a couple comments about the history and the purpose of alleys from the presentation that you had from staff and the conversation you had about that. Our position, and I guess I should back up and point out that I represent Henley and Mainview Homes. They're a large builder in the area, and we're currently working on a plat application over 100 lots up in the Tiffany Park area. So this is highly, highly relevant to our business and our future in the city of Renton. Coming back to the history and the purpose of alleys, alleys are not, in our view, land use neutral today, because as soon as you add more pavement to a plat, that drives additional stormwater detention requirements. Additional stormwater detention means additional land has to be taken out to provide that detention. We also think that topography is a much more seriously limiting factor, not just associated with the steep slope of an overall site or one steep slope on a site. What happens, and I'm a lawyer, not a civil engineer, and I haven't checked to see if any of you are civil engineers, so don't shoot me if you are. But as I understand it, when you're laying out a plat, you have the topography. I mean, every plat I look at has topography lines that have been measured on the ground. And there's at least 4 set things that you cannot change. You can't change the topographic location of your access road. You can't. It's already there. You can't change the topographical location of sensitive areas. You have a wetland on your site, you can't grade it up or grade it down. That would not be allowed. You can't change where your stormwater facility actually has to be located, because that's driven by the physics and water flowing downhill. And you can't change the grade that's required to meet ADA standards for crosswalk ramps at intersections. It's a very strict standard about what that grade needs to be. So those 4 things drive essentially the rest of your site design in terms of where you can put the lots, align roads, etc. And if you have topographic changes, you can have 2 backyards butting up against each other, put in a small retaining wall, and take up topographic grade that way across your project site. As soon as you throw an alley down behind those 2 lots, you've eliminated that opportunity.
I see.
And you've made the walls on the lots much more dramatic.
Right.
You have to have access off the alley, you have to have access off the streets. It's a very strange and not friendly or attractive environment. Probably is going to lose lots as well. From a safety perspective, I think we again can concur with some of the things we heard council members Person and Palmer discussing. You put in alley-loaded lots, put that garage in the rear yard. You no longer have much of a rear yard. Kids are going to play in the streets. They're also going to play in the alleys. I grew up playing in the streets. Thank God I was never hit by a car. But it is going to happen, and assuming that building alleys is going to prevent that, I don't think is a fair assumption. And overall, again, we do certainly share the concern, we raise the concern about the lack of predictability. That's absolutely accurate, and that's why we're here today. In the letter that I've provided to you, I've laid out first 3 points we want to clarify tonight, if we can, about different forms of an application in an R8 zone, so that we can understand how this administrative interpretation would apply to, quite frankly, the application we're putting together right now. And then we also recommend several minor amendments to the administrative interpretation to, we think, help effectuate the goals here. So the first situation that we want to confirm, I think, was addressed in Chip's presentation already, but I'm going to restate it here. And that is that if a developer submits a plat application, these are all long plats, I'm not worried about short plats, submits a long plat application for land in an R8 zone that's designed without alleys and with a density of 6 dwelling units per acre, then we don't need to also present an evaluation of size, topographic, or environmental impacts that would preclude use of alleys. I think you already answered that.
That's correct.
Okay. The second situation is, and this goes to the idea that alleys are an additional design standard that you apply when you have much, smaller lot development, more dense development. We read the discussion and the administrative interpretation to mean that when a developer comes in, R8 zone land, long plat application is designed to meet all R8 design standards, including lot width and setbacks, but to not include alleys, so long as the plat density is at 6 dwelling units per net acre, that's acceptable. That's correct as well, good. And then third, we want to confirm that if we submit a plat application in the R8 zone that's designed without alleys and with a density of 8 dwelling units per acre, then we do need to present staff an evaluation of the size, topographic, or environmental impacts that overall preclude the use of alley layout in our position.
Got it.
That's correct, okay. And maybe this is the kicker, I don't know.
3 for 3.
And that we would want to confirm that staff will probably confirm whether or not alleys are required, that you're actually going to look at the plan.
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. And then the next point is, again, the several minor amendments. One is so minor, it's adding the second code section that you're talking about amending to the title of the document. I think that belongs there, sure. The second is really very, very important. We are very concerned, again, I am a land use attorney. I take projects through hearings, sometimes very contested hearings, as you know, and I'm always thinking about what is the record, how do I prove that, what am I going to do? And I am concerned that as currently drafted, with the decision line of the administrative interpretation stating merely amend the code as shown below, that the administrative interpretation doesn't actually interpret anything. And that the hearing examiner might look at it and say, well, the code's here, you say amend it, hasn't been amended yet, what am I supposed to do with this? And so I am recommending that you add language that says, in the interim, the existing code shall be interpreted to effectuate the intent, as we've described it here in this memo, and also it's going to be clarified by future amendments, just to add some language along those lines. And then
I was going to say, on that point, we can do that. It's really what I like to call the belt and suspenders approach. But if you look at our code for administrative interpretations, that's actually spelled out in the code how they are accomplished. Not necessarily here, but in the code that establishes the rules for administrative interpretations. That's clearer than this.
Okay. I'm just a nervous Nellie.
Okay. No problem.
Or nervous Nancy, I
And I think
guess.
the other thing, Council, I mentioned to Nancy too, by the council committee report, we will want to take a look at that language to make sure that the language in the committee report would indicate council's concurrence in the staff's administrative interpretation. So in the event of an appeal or sometime before the hearing examiner, we could take that committee report to the hearing examiner and say, this is an indication that the city council reviewed this language and concurred with staff's interpretation. So I think everybody's trying to get to where Nancy is, which you don't have a hearing examiner saying, I hear what you're saying, staff, but I got the written code here and I have to go by the written code.
Thank you. And then the last point is on those factors that would be considered for a project that should have alleys, but the developer doesn't want to do them because he or she doesn't think they're feasible. We think you should amend the topography factor to address those issues I talked about before, the places where grade is set. And so we think you should just amend that to eliminate the term slope and reference topography not being conducive to alley configuration. And I've got specific language in the law.
Yeah. That looks fine.
All right, and that's about it for my letter there. I mean, we also had concerns with the use of may versus shall and that kind of thing in administrative interpretation, but I'm not sure we'll ever get over those, so.
Have you passed those to Chip, the may versus shall? And because I'd hope that, we could just accept those. But, I mean, I guess you want it to be consistent with the way we write our language, but.
Actually, if I could, I think probably this is one where
I didn't see the maybe.
Nancy would probably agree. So here's where staff's trying to be. I think in recognizing that we have a number of clients, if you will, in the building and development community. So I think Henley Homes would love to have more predictability. Other developers like the may, and so they like the idea that there's some flexibility. So what we tried to do with the master builders was find a balance that that hopefully would satisfy everybody. It's going to leave Henley a little bit uncomfortable.
I see.
Other folks probably, okay. I think you can live with the language the way it is. You'd love to have more shalls in there than there in there, but I don't think, at this point, I think,
At this point, I'm not planning an appeal,
There we
but
go.
it would be nice, just
Yeah.
throwing it out there as you consider this in the future.
I think we're trying to strike a balance that gives some flexibility, and we recognize that Nancy's client would love to have even more specificity than is in here.
May I ask, maybe you'd stay for just a second, and can I ask Mr. Hoffman back to the podium for a second? I'm starting to get a little nervous about the time. I was thinking this was going to be fairly fast, but.
Yes.
Okay, so my dilemma is, I think, I understand maybe that the Master Builders as an organization, or perhaps the board has taken a look at this language. Do I understand that correctly?
That is not correct, actually. Our board would not look at something like this. Our Housing Policy Committee would look at this, which they did on, I guess it was last Thursday.
Okay.
And they were happy
Okay.
with it.
All right, so, what I'm wondering about is we might face a dilemma where I don't know how fast we can refine this. I mean, I sense some appetite by the council maybe to refine this further. And the question I'd have is if that delays the changes, how do you feel about that?
Well, we would have rather this been addressed 6 months ago, but it depends on how long we're talking, frankly. If we're talking about a 2 to 3 week delay, that would add some level of frustration on our part. But if it's we're going to have a discussion about this for another week, I think a 1 week delay would be fine.
Okay. Okay, I should ask other council members to weigh in on just your overall impressions of where we're headed. I mean, Marcy and Don, you've been pretty outspoken, and it seems like I won't.
With the clarification that we've gotten from everybody, it sounds like they're in agreement, but the words aren't on paper right yet. That's...
Yeah, and if I can, to Councilmember Person's point, Angie and I have had a chance to read this, and we would agree to this as part of the Committee of the Whole report. This is completely in keeping
Okay, good. Yeah,
with
looks like-
what our recommendation is, and really see it as clarifying points. So
Good.
if you wanted to attach this to the recommendation, that would be
Yeah.
acceptable as part of the
Mr. President,
Yes.
if I may, we have this obviously in planning and development and the ongoing discussions for a few months on this. We're kind of where we were when we started, but we had the opportunity to get everybody there. And the driving force behind it is that the underlying code, and the reason we're doing the interpretation on it, is ambiguous and full of horrible terms, and is stopping some real progress on some people, and the certainty that the builders need to move forward. There is potentially the large-scale discussion, but as the administration proposed, is that we can kind of continue to work this issue into the future. I think there's some significant debate and underlying the policy and the design standards and dense housings that's built nothing but for cars, and does it build a sense of community? And that's a big, large discussion and very appropriate for the council, and very time-consuming, and probably involving the planning commission and that type of thing. I think that the administration's worked extremely hard with the affected groups to come to a reasonable interpretation that gives some certainty and understanding of where to go forward. And so I'd be a little hesitant on really spinning things out, because I think I would want to make some really compelling arguments why I don't want real dense houses with all garage loaded and design standards and lots of other horrible terms that master builders would hate for me to be saying up here on the dais about developing stuff. I think we're looking at a small part of the code that has caused very legitimate confusion, and we are trying to solve that. And we're hearing from a lot of the builders, and the builders I talked with, many of them understood that if you could at least give them that clarity so they could know what to roll out, how to roll it out, how to get it appealed and approved and that type of thing. I think we're accomplishing that here.
Prince?
Yeah, I want to just echo some of Councilmember Zwickers' sentiments. I feel like we've made a ton of progress from where we were back in June when we talked about this. So I would be extremely hesitant to say that we want to spin this out any further. I think our goal was to try to find more clarity. I feel like the two parties feel like there's a little bit more clarity, and I'm willing to let them work out whatever wordsmithing differences they have.
I wonder if I may, yeah, I wonder, and I do feel like we're close and that this is a major step forward and I don't want to mess it up. I think John raised some interesting issues that maybe we could do like a second chapter of this. I'm curious, when there's a homeowners association and there's an alley, but there's only an alley behind some of the homes, whether it becomes a homeowners association responsibility to maintain it, how do complaints get handled? There's just a whole lot of issues that come up with alleys, and I think we could reach agreement on this for today, and then we could come back and visit some of those other issues and maybe see if any of those cause spillover to where we might further amend.
Mr. President,
Go ahead.
just real quick, and I agree, I think that would be a great part two.
Yeah,
I think that we've kind of closed the chapter on part one here, and at least have gotten some agreement. I had an opportunity to go out and look at some of the Henley homes back in late July just to see what they were designing. So I've heard about this now for months. I think to delay any further, I think it's just,
Okay.
like Dave said, gonna cause more heartache. But I think that I agree with the stuff that Councilman Person was saying, Councilmember Hall was saying. I think that'd be an excellent part two.
Mr. Chair? I'm going to echo in on that also. I think that what I'm hearing is a compromise that has been reached. I'm hearing that the Master Builders Association is pleased with the effort that staff has made. They've addressed the ambiguity of and lack of clarity of the issues that were creating some of the problems, and I think that holding it up for further tweaking creates, from what I'm hearing, more frustration that has already exercised itself quite over a period of time. So I'm all for moving this thing forward as well.
Don Hills.
I just want to think that Chip's suggestion of adding the letter to the report, so there's clear intent of what we
I think it's a
did,
great idea.
is a great idea, and with that being attached as part of the report, then I'm all for it, and I would appreciate us having the further discussion on the other issues
Okay,
at a later time.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
okay. Okay, I think we're pretty close.
We look forward to that conversation as well.
Okay, good. Well, I thank you both. Let's see, I think, I'm trying to figure out how to, I've got a report then that's not exactly what we want, I think, because we've made some, I'd made that one addition too that I'd asked for on the,
Can't we hold it till next week? Or not? Does
Um,
that hold
can we
the,
hold it till next week?
Or can you work
You-
magic and get it
You
done
know,
before
the thing
we
is,
bring it up?
with administrative interpretations, these have to go through a public process, so I can go ahead and start the administrative interpretation, get that process going, and go ahead and build these comments in, and if the council wants to follow up, that's great, but we have a 2-week comment period. We wanted to check in with the council before we started that 2-week review process. So, if you could do it next week, that'd be great. It'd still be within that period. But we will go ahead, I will share with you, we will accept the comments and the recommendations made here today, build those into the administrative interpretation, and get that out for public review and comment, so we can keep this process moving in a timely way. I will also add one more thing if I can, and that is, administrative interpretations don't change policy. Some of the discussion we're starting to have here is really a change of policy for the city, and that's why I said at the end there, this is going to be part of the 2014 work program, so we can begin to have that policy discussion. But for an administrative interpretation, this is as far as we felt we could go to really refine this
Okay.
at this point in time.
So Chip, are you saying if we don't do this report till next week, you won't lose one day in how fast you can implement this?
That's right.
So you can start your 2-week comment period even before we've finalized this committee report?
With your I can't say concurrence. 'cause you
Yeah, we have a
to-
sense of the council that
Yeah.
the direction we're headed is not out of line with where you will likely be next week.
Okay.
And so we will, with that sense,
Yeah.
we'll try to incorporate it into the committee report.
Yeah, I think that's right, that there's no real official action that we're taking with this report other than just validating the direction you're going, which you've got a verbal on that, so, and I think that's good because I would maybe during the week want to include language in here that we're working to get the comments as identified in that letter, plus I'll even want to include that we'd like to do a referral, some of the details of alleys and how they get implemented, get captured in a follow-on committee of the whole meeting.
So we'll work with you to craft that committee report this week for the council.
Okay, very good. Well, hey, we did it, just barely by 7. So we've got, let's give ourselves a 2-minute break.
Good, thank you.
And then, thank you all very much.
We are trained to go help in natural disasters or any kind of a disaster, mainly in our own neighborhoods.
I thought it was great. Everyone came together and worked as a team.
CERT builds strong neighborhoods. I hope more people do come and take the class because as somebody who is concerned about what's going to happen to my neighborhood in a disaster, I'd really like some additional neighborhood support.
I would definitely recommend this to everyone in the community.